Hello, listeners, and welcome to Teachers Service UCS. I am your host, Lana, the educator. If you're a first-time listener on this channel, welcome. Here we explore the latest educational trends and tackle pressing issues facing the education sector. We also conduct insightful interviews with people making a difference and share stories of triumph and innovation from classrooms across the globe. If you're interested in all of this, then like and subscribe. Today on Teachers Have Issues, yes, we welcome my guest, Omari Augustine. Omari Augustine is a seasoned drum educator and media professional with over 16 years of experience. He provides online drum lessons to students worldwide, teaching innovative techniques that allow learners to master the drums even without owning a drum kit. In addition to his work as a musician, Omari specializes in videography and multimedia production with expertise in shooting, editing, sound design, and motion graphics. He has worked with prominent organizations such as Samsung, the University of Trinidad and Tobago, PanAm Aquatics, and the Aquatic Sports Association of Trinidad and Tobago, creating impactful content that resonates with diverse audiences. Outside of his professional pursuits, Omari is an avid traveler, a certified scuba diver, and has recently taken up boxing, embracing an adventurous and active lifestyle. So, as I said to my listeners, we have Omari Augustine with us here today. I want to welcome you to Teachers Have Issues. Yes.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you, most certainly. And you seem to be a man who wears many, many hats successfully. I don't know how you do it. How do you balance doing all of these things?
Sometimes I wonder myself. So
You've turned what many people consider or pursue as hobbies into a career, from drumming to scuba diving and boxing. So your hobbies are very incredibly varied. What drives this sense of adventure in Omari Augustine?
well, I've since I was small, I always tend to try new things and find things that I love doing. And I don't know, I guess it's the fact that I like sharing information and helping others grow. That it kind of expanded into teaching and while learning, teaching others how to do the same. So I guess that was one of my ways of, making things that I love doing a part of my everyday life and then kind of turning it into, I guess, what you refer to as like a job or my career. Yeah.
Interesting. So what came first, the drumming or the multimedia work?
So the drumming actually came first. I came from a musical background. My dad is actually a drummer as well. Well, he would say was, but he still plays. Um, Although not as frequently. So I grew up around him playing in different bands, having practice, and I would always be around what he was doing. So I had a general interest in the instrument.
Mhm.
And although he didn't directly teach me from, but just being around him all the time, I sort of picked up those things from him. And what eventually happened was I started teaching drums and doing videos and stuff of drum covers and different things. I started recording myself. So eventually, when I took up a job position at the university, I was actually just an administrative person.
Mhm.
And because they saw my skills in shooting videos and stuff like that, eventually got pulled into their marketing and communications department. So that's where the multimedia stuff really took off from there.
Oh, okay. So I saw that you said that, sometimes you approach to teaching drums without a drum kit. Sometimes.
Yeah.
How do you manage that?
So the beauty about the instrument of the drums is that it's a percussion instrument. So it simply means that you hit a surface and you
Mhm.
get a sound. And unlike the other instruments, you could more or less turn anything into drums. That's why you normally see children, especially who love drums, hitting buckets, pans, the desk, anything that they can find. So that in that way, I use that opportunity to teach people to play the drums, even though they don't own drums. And even seasoned drummers, we have techniques that we use when we're off of the drum set in order to practice while we're going through our everyday life. So you'll see us tapping on our chest, tapping on our legs, again, tapping on desks and all sorts of different things that we find available, and just making the different sounds that you would generally associate with percussion. So one of my main things is teaching students how to turn anything into a drum set and start to get familiar with just using all the different exercises and patterns that drummers would use to practice off of the drums. And eventually it becomes very easy for them to transition onto the drum set when they actually do get one.
Oh, interesting. What is the age group of students that you work with?
So I have students. My youngest student was actually 3 years old. And yeah, I very funny story. It was actually my niece,
Uh-huh.
and when she was 3 years old, she was insisting on coming to drum class. So I started bringing her along, and she was following along with some of the older students. And what I started using was balloons and flowers as some of the notation for her to follow along with. And she was reading those different symbols and notes, and I started using that as a way to teach her reading drum sheet music for drums and playing as well.
That's really
And
creative
my
and innovative.
yeah, the thing about working with kids, especially, you have to find creative ways to keep their attention and to keep them interested in the craft. Thankfully, the drums by itself is generally an instrument that kids tend to love for a long time.
And what about so from 3 to what age is it? Did you accept, retired people who want to learn drum and always wanted to use the drum set? All my life, I wanted to learn how to beat the drums, but my parents found it would have been a noisy hobby to
Yes,
pursue.
yes, of course. My oldest student, I believe, if I remember correctly, she was in her 70s,
Mm.
and she decided for exactly the same thing that you said. She all the time she wanted to learn how to play the drums, but she just never had the opportunity to. So
Mm.
I was really happy to make that dream for her happen. And then we had a little mini recital at the school I
Mm.
was teaching at the time, and she was able to play along to a song, and she was extremely happy about that.
Yeah, I found that, you would have been an interesting guest for the podcast because we tend to always focus, on the academic side of education and not necessarily
Yeah,
the arts and the creative side, which is very important to just the holistic development of people. So what
yeah.
has been your experience pursuing something that people consider, maybe not the mainstream or not the academic on the academic side of education? What has been your experience with that kind of perspective?
Well, I would say that it has been very interesting, especially to see when you're working with the kids, their parents have a shift in perspective about extracurricular activities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Education is a holistic thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes, as you mentioned, we focus a lot on the academic side of it, and we fail to realize how important sometimes the extra activities and stuff helps even with balancing off the educational aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
A perfect example of that is I've had students who weren't doing bad in school. They were doing pretty okay.
Mm-hmm.
And when they started music and drumming in particular, the parents noticed a very drastic change in their focus, because they had music is a sort of thing that you have to actually pay attention, especially if you're learning an instrument like the drums. There's a certain kind of focus because you have to use different limbs, and you have to kind of pay particular attention to when you do things, how things work together. And a lot of them would have seen a drastic improvement in how the students learn their learning ability, their learning speed, and a lot of times, even in everyday life, their physical coordination. So I believe that it has been a really great way of helping students to find a balance in their holistic education.
Yes, because it requires us a discipline that I think many
Yes.
people don't understand. Even when you talked about the 3-year-old with the notes and how you had to kind of be creative in how you had her read music, it
Yeah.
requires a theoretical part as well if you really want to pursue it seriously, I think. So I think a lot of people think anybody can do music. I mean, yes, kind sort of in terms of we can make a rhythm, but it is a serious discipline with that people kind of pursue, and it's not a cheap it's
Yeah,
not a cheap
definitely.
pursuit for sure. I've
Yes.
been learning. So I I think you would know of all people how just across the world, I think as educators, we see that arts education, especially music and drama and art in itself, has been threatened. What's your opinion of that?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to our appreciation of music in
Mm,
general. And the funny thing about living in Trinidad and Tobago and maybe even the Caribbean in general is that we have such a high concentration of creative arts and that ability, that musical ability, that for us, it seems like, the average Joe is expected to be good at some sort of creative thing. But
mm,
sometimes when that same person who might be unappreciated in one place goes to, let's say, the US or to the UK, and
mm,
they use that talent or skill, you realize that it's so amazing to somebody from the outside to see the level of skill that is available or is shown in Trinidad and from the Caribbean. So to me, it's just a matter of, you know, us not so much respecting, but having a better appreciation for the creative side of our culture. And it's a cultural thing that we have. And I believe that the more that we can, you know, have that appreciation for it, is the better it will do, not just locally, but on a global scale.
mm. Do you do your classes online or face to face, or is it both, or a hybrid method? How do you conduct your classes?
So at the moment, I'm only facilitating online classes.
Mhm.
Pre-COVID, I was doing in-person sessions, and the funny thing is, in 2016, I was experimenting with online classes using a kind of virtual reality space and stuff like that. And it was so interesting that when COVID happened, my students and I, we were so used to having classes recorded so that students who miss class can go back and go over lessons and go over courses, that they were already used to the online aspect of learning. So it was a simple transition for us to go online. And then because I have students now from as far as San Fernando, Chaguanas, in the east, in the west, in Port of Spain, it makes it easier than having a physical space that people might not have, the ability to travel to come to. So it takes sometimes a little bit of um, people getting used to the concept at first. So normally what I will do, I'll have somebody who's interested sit in the class, see how it's conducted. And usually off the bat, they are very excited to continue the process. So far at the moment, it's online. Although people have been asking me now to do some in-person classes, which I'll probably try to do some one-off sessions where we meet up as a class and have a little jam session. But for now, it's completely online.
So how do people reach you? How do people become aware of you, and how and when and what time you conduct your classes? How they can
So
contact you?
Usually, funny enough, people find me on when they are searching for music lessons
Mm-hmm.
online. So
Mm-hmm.
what my name apparently is one of the first that comes up. I'm guessing probably because in the past I have been on social media and pushing my music and drum content as well
Okay.
as my students' progress for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So normally when somebody's searching, they would find me, my website will come up, my social media will come up, and they'll call and ask about drum classes. So usually we have 2 sessions per week. We have Tuesdays and Thursdays. Usually have classes from 5 to 6 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have extended classes, and we normally have beginners on Tuesday and intermediate class on Thursday. However, when somebody signs up, they have access to all the classes. So if you're interested to sticking around any more advanced class to see if you know what you could pick up, students are always welcome to join in on all sessions.
Are the classes separated by age group? I know you have beginners, but do you have teens with adults and children, or is it by age group that the classes are separated?
Right. So usually our classes are mixed. So we
Okay.
have a mixed bunch of students. Now, the interesting approach I have to working with students that are of different age, we
Mm-hmm.
normally have some exercises that are broken into separate parts. So the students who may not be as advanced, there's one particular part of the exercise that they will work on, while the more advanced students will have a piece that they might add on to it, which makes it a little more complicated. So that while we are doing a particular exercise, everyone can join in at the same time and learn from that exercise.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So everything has been evolving, especially as we kind of, switch online and all of that. What do you think the future of music education online would look like?
Oh, that is a very interesting question. I believe that as the technology improves, I believe that online education will be something that is standard. And
Mm.
especially with the developments like virtual reality, the different
Mhm.
ways that they are going. Even more recently, I would have seen where you have drumsticks that have a few electronics in them. That when you move and you sit and you play like a, on a drum set, you'll actually hear the sounds coming from the sticks and stuff like that. So more and more, you'll see technology kind of paving the way for all these new ways that we can incorporate into online and distant learning. And I believe that it's only going to get a lot better from here, which means that even more doors will be open to those in music education where the borders of being in a different part of the world won't be existing anymore.
Mm. With all the, the developments online and in terms of, I guess let me equate it with things like language learning apps like Babel or those other kind of what is the one with the
Duolingo and
bird? Yeah, where they learn
yes.
language and so forth. And I know there probably are music versions of that. What do you think the role of the personal, like the personalized, the human music teacher would be, considering that you have these new developments taking place online in terms of music tutors being like more virtual and not the human version like yourself?
Ooh, well, I still believe that as humans, we still have that need to have relationships with people and to have that sort of communication. So even as much as I say, apps like Duolingo and
Right.
Babel and all of those things are it can be very effective. I think nothing will beat that one-on-one human interaction because there'll be little nuances that that will be different, especially as you think about things like culture and stuff like that. So, for example, even music learning apps, there might be a very short or small amount that might have focus, let's say, on Caribbean music like soca
Hmm.
and dancehall, zouk.
Hmm.
So it might take a very long time for those things to actually be populated and become a norm. So somebody who is learning or who is interested in learning like Caribbean style music might still need to get in touch with a musician from Trinidad and Tobago from the Caribbean in order to learn properly that style of music. So I believe there's still a long way to go in terms of those apps and things just completely taking over. And just generally, I believe people still want that one-on-one connection with an actual person. So I believe there'll always still be room for that.
What do you say to the person who, they want to learn music, but they are hesitant, they're afraid, they think it's too late to start? What would you say to somebody like that?
Oh, my favorite kind of people to work with. Uh, and that's one of the main reasons I usually give people the opportunity to sit in a class and see what it's like first. Because
Mm.
sometimes we have that hesitancy because we think we may not be good at it.
Mhm.
And sometimes it just takes making that first step to realize that you may have just been overthinking it all along.
Mm.
There are many times when somebody comes and they start class, and I take a song that they are very familiar with, and
Mm.
I can explain what the drummer is doing in the song, and
Mm.
I show them, okay, if you think about it, if we count in 1, 2, 3, and 4, we have this part of the drums playing on 1, another part playing on 2, part playing on 3, another part playing on 4. And when they understand it in that way, it's like a whole light bulb moment where you see it, you see all the gears going in their head, and then they start to understand how these things relate to each other. And it's such an amazing thing to see somebody transition from being afraid of learning the instrument
Mm.
to being completely excited about learning more. So that's one of my favorite things about teaching
Yeah.
music, especially. You see people's minds just completely open, and it's amazing to see them find this new passion or expand on this passion that they have had for a very long time.
Very nice. I hope you guys are hearing.
So
So let's
don't be
transition
afraid.
to
Yeah.
let's transition to your media career. How did you first get involved in the videography and the multimedia production?
So I have always been one to try different things and find ways to do things without having the proper equipment. So what really took off my media career was trying to record drum covers. A drum cover is simply, or a cover is simply a musician or somebody singing over an original piece and they record their own version or interpretation of it. And one of the challenges I had was that I wanted to record a video where I had multiple camera angles.
Mm.
But the problem was I only had one phone at the time or camera at the time. So
Mm.
what I did was I recorded different versions of me playing with the camera set up in different locations. So I had to play the song over and over. And I started learning to edit and piece those things together. And
Mm.
I really enjoyed it. So it became a norm. And at the time, a lot of people, especially locally, weren't really doing that sort of stuff. So it became something that I enjoyed doing, and people started liking the videos. So I started doing more, and it just became a part of what I did usually. And eventually, people started asking me to help them do videos and create videos. And as I mentioned before, it kind of opened the opportunity for me to work with the University of Trinidad and Tobago as part of the marketing and corporate communications team. So then I started doing things like interviews, little commercials,
Mm.
and it grew from there and branched off into me working with a lot of the companies and people that I always look forward to working with.
He's being very humble here because he's worked with organizations like Samsung and he was recently with the PanAm Aquatics, right?
Yes,
So he's
yes.
being very, very humble. What has been your favorite project, or some one that stood out to you? What has been your
Ooh,
favorite?
I will. That's tough. I'll have to say working with Samsung as a brand ambassador.
Mm-hmm.
That came about. Interestingly enough, they were looking at that's before influencers and stuff became a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
They were looking to start a market using people who are familiar with shooting on mobile and that kind of stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
interestingly enough, I was already doing all of that. So when I reached out to them, they were glad to have me on board, especially when they saw the work that I was already doing.
Mm-hmm.
And normally they'll have different brand ambassadors every year. They'll kind of rotate them out. But I was working with them from 2019 all up until 2023. Yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, it was a pretty interesting thing. And the beautiful thing about that, the reason why I was interested in that is because I was allowed it to do my own style and bring forth my own kind of creativity to the content that they were putting out.
Mm.
And I didn't have to, you know, do much different. I was still pushing my drumming content and doing it in different ways. And I was able to teach people a lot of, how to shoot content using their phones,
Mm.
different ways to make the content that they're doing a little bit better, getting better audio, getting better stability in their shots. So it was really interesting in working with them because I've been a fan of their devices for a very long time in terms of TVs, phones, and appliances. So it was one of my dreams come true.
Oh, perfect. Would you consider yourself to be self-taught? I'm not sure. I've been listening to you, and with the drumming and the videography and all of that, it sounds like you're self-taught, but I don't know if you're self-taught or if you've had some sort of formal training. Could you clarify for us?
Yes, so I am absolutely self-taught. I am self-taught. Not because I am against like formal education, but like for me growing up, I had a bit of a phobia against sometimes exams.
Mhm.
So I would know all the material, but as soon as exam time came, it was like a mental block just used to come in my mind. But um, I still agree with formal education. I'm kind of gotten over that now, thankfully. But I have learned both drumming and my content creation by on my own, by trial and error, working through different difficulties, finding ways to do things outside of the norm. And that has been a really great experience for me. And I believe that it can work for others as well. And sometimes you just need to try things and find ways that they work. And people think that, failing and getting things wrong is a bad thing, but I usually consider them or think of them as finding out ways that they don't work. And that's
Mhm.
it.
Ah, let's just get to know you a bit more as this multimedia, I'm gonna say expert, given how far you've gotten on your own.
Yeah.
So what's your preferred gear that you like to use? You know, what cameras and software or tools that are essential to just your workflow?
All right. So at the moment, I know the people into who are into videography and stuff like that, there's usually a big war in terms of which brand is better and which brand is
Mm-hmm.
best. I love shooting with Canon cameras,
Mm-hmm.
simply because I started off using them and I'm just gotten so used to them, and I'm used to the quality that they put out, and I find them easy to work with,
Mm-hmm.
especially when introducing somebody to them for the first time. You know, it's a nice camera to have. So I use camera more or less them new mirrorless cameras. I
Mm-hmm.
presently shoot on a R8, the Canon R8.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in terms of software, I use Adobe Premiere Pro.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, I started using that through working with the university, and I just find it very easy, especially when you work with other Adobe products, for example, like Lightroom for editing photos, After Effects for creating motion graphics, and because the software they are from the same company, it's very easy to cross-platform with them. So if I'm working with a file from Adobe, from Photoshop or After Effects inside of Premiere Pro, once I make the change to the file across there, it automatically updates in the other software. So little things like that are some of the reasons why I've chosen that software to work with. And I also use CapCut from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Especially because people have been asking me to teach videography and video editing, and
Mm-hmm.
CapCut it's free. It's a very easy program to use. So yeah, I think it's a very nice software to start off with, just
Mm-hmm.
to kind of get your hands, as I say, dirty in starting to learn videography and video editing. Yeah.
Uh,
Um, what else can I say in terms of gear? Um, Lots of times people have the wrong idea in terms of when they are looking at camera equipment. They try to get what's the latest and what they believe would be the best. But
mm-hmm.
most times you have to find out what you plan to do or what you like shooting first, and that will determine what kind of equipment you get. Not just
Mm-hmm.
buying a camera and then deciding, okay, I want to do X, Y, and Z. Sometimes it's determined by what you do. Sorry, what you do is will determine, sorry, what equipment you get to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a bit about your creative process. How do you approach planning and conceptualizing when you have a new a project?
Right. So my first thing in working on a new project is, most times when I work on a new project, I am sometimes unfamiliar with the not necessarily the company, but sometimes what is the product that they're putting out, or what
Mm-hmm.
is the idea that they want to get out there. So my first thing is, I enjoy learning about different things, and that's the beauty about what I do. I had the opportunity to work in different areas, sports, technology, and that kind of stuff. So my process usually starts with kind of getting an understanding from somebody who may not know about the product or service, and I have that perspective in terms of, okay, what would I want to know about it? So that's why I start to plan the story in
Mm-hmm.
terms of what you want to put out there. After that, one of the most important thing is the emotion of the what content you are trying to put out.
Mm-hmm.
Believe it or not, it's a very strange thing, and maybe because I'm a musician,
Mm-hmm.
my process then goes to selecting a song for the project, sometimes even before any sort of video is shot, because the song brings out the emotion, so whatever emotion you're trying to portray, and then I usually edit to the music. One of my favorite things or parts of the process, editing to the music, because it
Mm-hmm.
helps kind of carry the story along, and it usually in a subliminal way carries you from the beginning to the end and tells a story along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Then yeah, shooting is usually the easiest, most straightforward part. And this is usually because this is usually done after having a conversation with the client in terms of, what they want captured on film,
Mm-hmm.
what is the most important details that they want captured, and then little nuances as adding in sound effects and stuff like that will bring the end process, the end product. Yeah, so that's usually my process, a kind of shortened version of the process.
Yeah, but you did quite well. You talked about the sound design and the editing philosophy and all of
Yeah.
that. So I think you gave us a very good idea. I wanted to ask you about is, you've basically been describing that yourself taught. So that must have come with some trial and errors. So what are some of the, the more common challenges that you faced in your work, in your multimedia work, in production, and how did you overcome those challenges?
Right. So one of the biggest challenges is not having the right equipment for the
Hmm.
job.
Hmm.
Um, but as I mentioned before, I usually like a challenge like that because it's always exciting to find different ways to do something.
Hmm.
And usually within those problems, I discover different ways of just not only doing that job, but sometimes I different ideas come about for future things that I might need to work on, and I'm
Hmm.
like, hey, that's an interesting way to do this sort of concept. I'll keep that in mind for another project or even a project of my own that I plan to work on. So sometimes the challenges are not, thankfully, haven't been anything that has been extremely difficult to the point where it has completely stopped things from happening.
Hmm.
So I always say approach things with a willingness to learn. Never feel like you know enough, and you'll be surprised at how many different other opportunities come about. Yeah.
Hmm. So I know you've said that you've worked with Samsung, and of course you have your private clients and things like
Yeah.
that. So how do you ensure that you have effective collaboration in working with clients and directors? And I'm assuming sometimes you have to work with another team. How do you ensure that that effective collaboration takes place?
Right. So usually communication is extremely important.
Hmm.
Having that openness to you know, say, hey, we're having problems with this or we need assistance with that. Sometimes it's hard to trust that somebody else could do something, especially when you know you want it a certain way. So
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest challenges.
Hmm.
But once you have that communication and you kind of express, okay, what is the client, what is the outcome the client is looking for, what are the different things that we agree has to get done, and you have
Hmm.
that open communication, it's usually easy to get the process going, and then eventually you find a way to work along with some other people and you end up building a team that or a relationship that okay, we have a little bit of confidence in the skills that this person has and it's easier to work with them in the future. So sometimes you just have to allow people to do what they are good at
Hmm.
and sometimes have that little bit of hands-on approach and trust the process. But yeah, usually that makes the work a lot easier.
Do you work with the small man? I know you have Samsung and you have PanAm and you have the videography. What other, I don't know, the parameters of your work, what boundaries do they have? I don't want to say boundaries, but if you get the gist of it, do you work with the small man or do you just work with company, businesses and so forth?
No, no, I usually work with a lot of small businesses and
Hmm.
people who are just have their things that they starting up.
Hmm.
I met somebody actually on a trip to Dominica. I
Hmm.
met someone who she does yoga and that sort of stuff, and she
Hmm.
was interested in starting to do some content. So I did some work with her remotely,
Hmm.
editing and that kind of stuff, and it was a very simple project, but I always enjoy working on those things. As I say, you learn a lot of new things by working on smaller projects.
Hmm.
And I've worked on some small projects with somebody developing a course for hydroponics.
Wow.
At the time, I didn't know anything about I knew about it, but I didn't know a lot of details into it and didn't realize that it was so technical.
Hmm.
And I actually, for the story, in me actually recording the course, I actually got certified in the course because I was there for the entire process.
Right,
So,
right.
so I actually love those smaller projects because it's always fun. And most times you have free range in terms of creative freedom to
Hmm.
kind of steer the way that the actual end product comes out. So
Mm.
it's usually fun to work with smaller businesses or people now starting up and even individuals. Sometimes somebody just wants me to come and record. They have an event and just
Mhm.
want to record the process. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to, kind of listeners, and for my own edification to know if you know, because I know most people we hear videography or a videographer, and you think something very large scale, or you might
Yeah.
think a wedding, a wedding videographer, and that's the extent of it. So it's interesting to hear these different things like the artwork and there's the personalized, promotion of a person's brand and so forth, are
Yeah.
ways that we can use videographers out there and use you as, a resource to do that. So what is your strategy for maintaining high quality work, under tight deadlines? Because I'm sure, because I looked at you and I even followed you in the Pan Am games and when you were doing those videography, I'm sure you had some tight deadlines sometimes you have to work with, and then you have to ensure the quality of your work was very high as well because you're promoting yourself. So
Yes.
what's your strategy for doing that, having that balance between high quality work and working under tight deadlines?
So one of the most important things is having a process,
Mm,
some sort of process, because as I mentioned, sometimes the project might be new, so you don't know exactly how the flow of things might be. But
mhm,
once you have a little small process that you follow. So, for example, the same PanAm Masters, we had a very small team working on that project. So we had a small room set up. So while we had events going on, as soon as one event was done or a couple events was done, we kind of decided, okay, when we were going to switch and swap out, then we had to dump our footage. Then while they had an intermission or something going on, somebody's editing the footage, and we had a small, process to kind of make sure that every day for the duration of the events, we
mhm.
had content that was consistently flowing.
No.
So having a process of some kind usually is the biggest way to work on those types of projects, or
Mm,
actually any project. Once you have a process to do things, it makes it easier, and you can always tweak on the way. When you realize, okay, there's a certain bottleneck at this point of the process, we know,
mm,
okay, what can we change here to make the flow of that process a lot better. So regardless of what you're working, if you're working on a big production or
mm.
even a small project, a process is the process is usually the best thing to keep you on track of delivering on time, making sure that the quality is the same, being consistent, and yeah, that's usually my way of getting that quality out consistently.
Mm. Is it important for someone like you, or even people who would say, my job is to be this videographer? Is it very important for them to build a portfolio of work? And why would that be? If so, I'm not sure. I know, like as
Uh,
writers or so forth, you want to build and show. I've written these articles for these newspapers and so forth. What is it like for a videographer out there to build a portfolio?
Yes. So as a videographer, you absolutely need to have a portfolio.
Mm,
Absolutely. Um, and even if it's not in a related field,
mhm,
because people want to see what you're able to do to accomplish, what is your quality of work. So I know usually the hardest part is getting started. So which is why there's usually, I would say, two options. You either work with I you work on some projects for free, but
mhm.
I don't like to use the word free. It's not really free. We're basically exchanging your skills for experience
Right.
in getting stuff added to your portfolio. So
Mhm.
usually what I recommend is work on a few projects with somebody, even if you don't want to charge that or do it for free. You could let them know a small course is involved. Or what I like to do, or what I did, was I would have somebody do like a testimonial video in
Right.
exchange for shooting a small video for them, and use that as a way to build your portfolio.
Mm.
And before you know it, people start asking if you do other work, and you could even ask those guys for recommendations. And that's where usually you get those works that help build your portfolio along the way come from. It never really starts all the way up here. If you're now starting, you have to start small and work your way up. Yeah, so having that portfolio, or the other option is working with somebody who's already in the business as an assistant, just being around, helping them with lighting, setting up stuff, moving things. You learn from them, and eventually you become an assistant there. You learn all the different aspects of videography, and from there you start getting jobs when I can't make it, because there are lots of times when somebody's working on a project and they say, hey, I can't make this project, or maybe I don't even have the skills to do this type of stuff.
Mm.
But because I've seen you done this already, I don't know if you would like to take the project or take lead on the project. So that's how it goes. The more you do, the more work you do, is the more you add to your portfolio and the bigger the projects get.
I want to kind of find out your opinion on, or just your thoughts, because you're doing, everybody has a camera now in their hands. It's in
Yeah.
the phone. So, to me, and some people are doing quite well with their phones. Sometimes you look on, the internet and you see the things
Mhm.
they've done with just simply their cell phone. Do
Yes.
you see these sorts of, I don't know if I want to call them amateur, forgive me. I don't want to even say threatening, but what are your thoughts on what's happening with people and cameras out there, and you considering yourself a professional videographer, but then we don't have to use the traditional methods anymore to say, okay, I hired Omari, Augustine to come and do this video when my nephew, who is 12, can probably pick up his cell phone and do a pretty good job as well. In your line of work, how have you contended with that?
For me, I absolutely love it,
Hmm.
because the thing is, there are all sorts of different opportunities out there. And not just that, um, there's a certain style of doing different things.
Okay.
So for the most part, somebody wanting to put out a professional looking style of content, maybe for a commercial or for an ad that's circulating on whether it's social media or on TV,
Hmm.
most of the times they won't look for somebody shooting on a phone.
Right.
But sometimes, if you're doing content for like your brand, they have a brand and they just want to put out content on a daily basis, nothing is wrong with using your mobile device. I mean,
Hmm.
it's actually the most convenient thing because it's always with you. You can not only shoot videos, you can edit on your phone. I've done it many times. You can upload to social media one time, you can respond to people. So there is an advantage to using mobile devices. And I have actually done projects and included footage from mobile devices already, just because it was the most convenient thing to use at the time. It wasn't that important for it to look like a fancy visual that came from a camera. So there's always the opportunity. And I would say mobile devices are very good to start learning the basics on,
Hmm.
because actually most of them now have the opportunity to learn some of the different modes or some of the different settings that you will find in your regular cameras on
Hmm.
them. If you're going to pro mode, they might be able to change things like the shutter speed and the aperture and the ISO. And so it's actually a nice way to get into professional videography, if you want to,
Hmm.
starting with your mobile device and working your way up from there.
Good. I saw in your bio that and you even referenced, I think, going to Dominica, but you saw in your bio that, traveling it seems to be a passion of yours as well. And I
Yes.
know that obviously, and that would broaden your perspective. So how have your travels influenced your creativity and work?
Oh, well, I my wife and I started traveling from year one. I have had the opportunity. We've traveled before individually.
Mm,
Actually, when I started playing drums with the Nazarene Worship Center Steel Orchestra, we
mm,
went on tour to like the Dominican Republic, to various states in the US. We went to Barbados. Growing up, probably in my early to mid teens.
mm,
So since then, I always loved, traveling, going to different countries, experiencing different cultures.
mm,
And since my wife and I got married, we, try to make an effort at least once a year to go
mm.
somewhere. you know. So far it's been good, minus COVID when we couldn't go anywhere. But that year we actually came back from the US before COVID happened. So thankfully. But yeah, I just really enjoy, you know, experiencing different cultures and seeing the different ways that people approach life, music, content. And it has influenced me in such a way that even we started our own channel, called the Augustine Adventures,
Mm,
um, where we travel different places, even locally, find different spots that, and give our, view of different things about the places. So it has indeed, you know, made an impact on my way of shooting content,
mm.
finding different ways to shoot different things in different places. Yeah. So it's a really interesting thing when you experience different cultures and different ways of doing things.
So if you could work on any project or with any brand, what would it be?
Ooh. Hmm.
Your dream, your dream job.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. Oh, I've never really,
Never
I guess I never, Well,
And
I don't
that's
want to say I
fine,
never
because in
thought
listening
about
to
it
you, I
like
say,
that.
you it's not like you're a one-track mind. I find that as experiences come about for you, you take them as learning opportunities and you make them into something and
Yeah.
you make them your own. So it's okay.
So
I just decided to ask the question. Now you have a question you
that's
can think about for the future.
yeah,
What would
but
be my dream?
okay, so as I mentioned, I recently took up boxing, right?
Right.
So as I did the swimming and I did boxing, I really started getting into sports
Mhm.
content.
Mhm.
So I found that very interesting. And then I saw that there was somebody I knew on Facebook. He went to Paris for the Olympics and stuff like that. He was doing content with the news and updating and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
I found that to be very interesting and would like to, work on a project like that someday, some sort of Olympic or sporting event internationally. Yeah.
And I see that you've gone into I think you're a certified scuba diver now,
Oh,
so
yes.
maybe your
So
next foray would
actually,
be
yeah,
underwater video
that's
videography. I know
interesting.
I've seen
Yes,
that on I see it
I
on
forgot that one.
National Geographic.
Yes, yes. So I actually there is the beautiful thing about scuba diving. There are different avenues that you can segue into, whether it's rescue diver, night diving, wreck diving,
Mm,
underwater videographer is one, and I do plan to get that certification. So yeah, that's on the list for sure.
right. Yeah.
Yes, and
Excellent.
underwater videography and photography. Yeah.
So I'm not too sure about what you might know about podcasting, but what tips would you give someone who is, wanting to start a podcast and using a videographer? What tips would you give them?
Ooh, nice. So this is for the podcaster, right? This tip is for the podcaster, right? So I would say if you're already podcasting, you
Mhm.
can start to incorporate video into your podcast already.
Mhm.
It's just a matter of setting up the camera, having it on you, and the beautiful thing is, I know the biggest problem that people have with recording themselves on video is how they look on camera,
Right.
right? But I always say this, right?
Mm.
For the most part, the people who know you, which are usually going to be your first set of, your first audience that will be joining in on your program, they
Right.
already know what you look like. All right. So that's a great starting point because usually
Right.
it's friends and family. They already
Mhm.
know what you look like most
Right.
times on your good days and your bad days. So harping on that, it's not going to help. And trust me, they've already seen you in many forms, different hairstyles, different clothing, and stuff like that. So, and I would say, start with a topic or with people that you are comfortable with and
Mhm.
familiar with.
Mhm.
Because usually what happens then is you tend to forget that the camera is even there, right? And the even more beautiful part about it is that with videography and stuff, you can edit before you post things.
Mhm.
So, you know, don't overthink it too much. You can cut things out, you can make changes, you can do it over if you need to. So don't stress too much about it. Get it started. Try it once, you'll realize it may not be as hard as you think.
Mhm.
And try it in small batches. You have a short podcast, then you start to extend the time to
Mhm.
the point of where you would like it to be, whether it's an hour or so. But you could start with like short podcasts with like 5 to 10 minutes,
Right.
10 to 12 minutes to 15 minutes, 15 minutes to half an hour, and you
Right.
eventually reach to that point where you're doing like some of those guys on YouTube and stuff where they're having 2 hour long podcasts where you sit and
Right.
talk and they get so comfortable with the camera that it's a walk in the park. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Omari Augustine,
Yes.
for being a wonderful guest. Very, very interesting, very entertaining, very personable. You guys look out for him. I'll be posting his social media so that you can follow him. If you want to engage his services, I'm sure he'd be most appreciative as well. I want my listeners
Yes.
to know that you empower minds and you ignite curiosity. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Omari.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.